Hello, my name is Jimmy Cunningham, and my GIST 909 project is on monitoring drought resistance of corn, soybeans, and oats in Iowa from 2000 to 2023 using remote sensing. And so just a little introduction and facts about my study area, which is Iowa. It is number one producer of corn, number two producer of soybeans in the US, and of this corn, only 1% of it is sweet corn. Um, the rest is what's known as field corn or dent corn, or more colloquially known as feed corn. And this field corn is mostly used for animal feed and ethanol. And 90% of available land in Iowa is devoted to agriculture. Um, and the largest weather-related reason for crop loss in Iowa is droughts. And since 2000, Iowa has had over 10 billion in crop loss insurance payouts, with a very large factor being droughts. And so, the question I'm trying to answer with this project is, how much more drought resistant have corn, soybean, and oats become? And kind of a secondary question, what sources and tools can we use to track and mitigate these droughts? Starting with one of the tools, the drought is drought monitoring. And this is mostly done by the US Drought Monitor and has been doing it since 1999. And they take in a lot of different factors to determine droughts. These factors are precipitation, snowpack, soil moisture, vegetation health, stream flow, lake and reservoir levels, and humidity. Then from these factors, they're able to calculate a drought intensity and a location. And then a map is created, and these maps are created every week and released on Thursdays. And going into different ways to mitigate drought. So one way is by genetically modifying plants, specifically corn and soybeans, with the corn genetically modified drought resistant tolerant being released in 2011, sometime between 2011 and 2013, and soybeans in 2017. But this is not the only way to mitigate droughts. There are other ways, such as plant breeding, planting early, mulch cover, and cover crops, which the latter of the two preserves and protects soil against things such as erosion. And then the main process I'll be using for this project is remote sensing, which is just kind of basic, is just scanning the reflectance of different bands in the electromagnetic spectrum. Specifically for this, it'd be the green, red, and near infrared bands. And then the different combination of these create ratios or indexes, and the main index I'll be using for this is the normalized difference drought index, which measures how healthy a plant is combined with how much water it contains. And then for data, the cropland data layer, which is a raster, it shows where each crop is located using satellite imagery and remote sensing. So it's not 100% accurate, but it's still a very good source. And using something called Cropscape, which is maintained by George Mason University, but this is Cropland Data Layer is a USDA product. And then also, as mentioned before, the US Drought Monitor. I'm taking it from May 15th to October 15th, which is considered Iowa's growing season from 2000 to 2023. Then the National Agricultural Statistics Service, which is also underneath the USDA. And I got the annual yields in bushels per acre for corn, soybeans, and oats through the specified years. And then for my satellite imagery, I used different Landsats and acquired these through the App Ears application, which is run by NASA. And for Landsat 5, did it through the growing season again, up till 2011, and Landsat 7 in 2012. And I only used Landsat 7 in 2012 because Landsat 5 was decommissioned in 2011, or I guess early 2012. And then Landsat 8 wasn't put online until 2013. So I needed something to fill that gap. And I didn't use Landsat 7 for any other years because Landsat 7 had a hardware component failure that left wedge-shaped spaces of missing data on either side of the image. But I was able to gather enough images to create something that is comparable to all the Landsat 5 and 8 data, and Landsat 8 up till 2023, and using green, red, near infrared bands for all of those. And going into the methodology, starting with the US Drought Monitor, all the shape files for the year are combined to create the average drought intensity, and that would be, since it's released weekly throughout the growing season, to take all those together and then calculating the average. And you can see from the graph below, it just displays what the average was for each year. You can see some are negative, and that's due to the drought intensity index. The scale that the US Drought Monitor used starts at 0. And so I had to come up with something that would mean nothing, as in there's no drought at all. So I use -1 for that. And on the right is just a map showing the sort of the averaging out of all those maps, those weekly maps, using the US Drought Monitor's drought intensity index, and then those blank, any areas that are blank are considered that -1, as in 0 drought at all. And going into use it in the data from the crop, or the methodology for the cropland data layer. First, it was a raster data that I converted into vector, and then removed all crops other than corn, soybeans, and oats. And then removed all the polygons that were smaller than 1.5 acres. I just included the degrees squared because that was the unit that was used in ArcGIS when I did these calculations or processes. Those were removed, and I did that partially to make the amount of polygons more manageable, since after converting from raster to vector, those number of polygons were in the millions. And just to make it easier on processing, I reduced, and when I did this, removing those small polygons, it reduced anywhere from 35 to 95% of all the polygons, which helped. And I noticed that the smaller polygons tend to be more inaccurate. I was finding things such as like oat fields being in the middle of like downtowns of a city, which just wouldn't be the case. And it's just kind of the just kind of what comes with these maps originally being made with just satellite imagery. I'm going to get some errors here and there. And here's just a larger image from 2023. And I had to include an inset so you could see where the oat fields actually are, because it's just saying how few there are in Iowa and how small they normally are. And you can see that corn and soybeans takes up most of it. Now going into the normalized difference drought index, or NDDI as we're calling it from now on. So all the images again were taken during the growing season, and then the green, red, and near infrared bands, which that resulted in about 55 images per band per year. And then taking all of those, so like the individual bands, for example, like green, taking all those and then combining them together to create a single raster, and using the Mosaic to New raster tool, specifically with the operator set to minimum, and that was to reduce cloud cover. And taking the minimum, we'll just take the minimum pixel value out of all the rasters, and then it'll combine them into a single image. And then below is the formula that I used to create the NDDI value. And this was just also a combination of other indexes, but I just left the formulas to make it easier for me, so I didn't have to calculate different indexes every single time I wanted to get an NDI value. I could just do it in one go. And then also for NDDI, the smaller the value, or smaller values signify that the vegetation is under less drought stress. So here's just a larger image of that, 2023, and if it's more green, then indicates under less drought stress. And then you can also see here there was a little bit of a issue with banding, but that is also just kind of the nature of using satellite imagery, since they are taken in bands like this. And also that I couldn't reduce cloud cover entirely, but I was able to reduce the majority of it. So that's also not completely perfect as well. Now going into the results, starting with corn. Corn saw a sustained average yield increase despite the different and varying drought conditions. So with this, you could say that corn has become more drought resistant over time. And then a few years to point out, 2011 has very high NDDI value despite a low drought intensity and higher yields as well. And that was due to a series of weather events that caused major crop damage, which is then reflected in that high NDDI value. But then this also indicates that other factors can alter it outside of droughts if they're extreme enough. And then 2012, which saw the worst drought post 2000 in Iowa, and then which is shown with the low yields and high drought intensity and high NDDI value. And then from 2020 to 2023, Iowa saw its longest period of sustained drought since the 1950s, but the yields stayed steady and are just as high as previous years, aside from 2020, which I think COVID and the pandemic had a lot to do with that, but still the years after that, it did bounce back. And then going to soybeans, a similar picture to corn where average yields have been increasing over time despite the drought conditions. And it seems that according to the NDI value that soybeans is a little better at resisting drought than corn, aside from 2011 and 2012 where it did much worse, or at least I guess when I say much worse, I mean the crop itself, the plant itself was showing signs of drought. There may not have been other drought conditions, or there may have been other drought conditions, such as like little precipitation or high heat or stuff like that. But the plant itself, which the NDI value is describing, shows that it was under drought stress. And then again, from 2020 to 2023, under that long period of drought, yields were still just as high. And in 2021, even the highest that they have ever been. And now going into oats. Didn't see as much of a sustained average yield increase as corn and soybeans, but it didn't drop either. So it was kind of in between. And also the yield changes here seem kind of independent of drought. And a couple of reasons for this could be oat field locations being more inaccurate than corn or soybeans, I found. And less than 1% of cropland in Iowa is planted as oats. So it could be that just a smaller sample size. And there was also, I found a high fluctuation in acres planted per year compared to corn or soybeans. But it is a good showing of a crop that has not had any genetic modification done to it to increase drought resistance. Not saying other methods of drought mitigation are used and even plant modification, but not genetic modification. It's also planted in smaller fields and it's less commercialized in Iowa's corn and soybeans, but it's still commercialized, but not to the extent corn and soybeans are. And then so with this, I can conclude that over time, corn and soybeans have shown to be more resistant to drought. And then oats have been shown to be slightly more drought resistant, but the average yield has not increased or decreased over time. But I guess going back as of late, in the past few years, it has been going up. So if this study was continued for longer, then we could see if it is becoming more drought resistant or not. And then when the crops themselves are displaying signs of drought, which is indicated by an NDVI value, a high one, the average yield has been staying the same or increasing from previous years. And I guess that's the end. So thank you.